Good morning, everyone. So for the next hour, all things e-cigarettes, which I'm sure you're all dying to hear about. So I have a request before I begin. I would like all of you, to the extent possible, to suspend for the next 60 minutes everything you think about e-cigarettes. So I'm asking you to come to this presentation with an open mind. Because in this issue, more than any other I've worked on, all is not as it seems. And there is a flip side to every stat, every conclusion of a research paper that you've heard. And what my goal is for the next hour is to give you a thorough overview of both sides of this issue. So this is what I intend to cover. A brief introduction for those of you who haven't lived and breathed e-cigarettes for the last 4 years, as I have. So what are they? How are they being marketed and sold? Who's using them in Canada? And then a summary of the research, both for and against, looking at the health effects, possible health effects, as well as their effectiveness or lack thereof as a cessation aid, and developments in legislation, both in Canada and briefly abroad. And then I'll conclude with whether or not, in my opinion, based on the research, always the research, right, Rob? E-cigarettes are a friend or a foe. And I will ask that people hold questions to the end, simply so that I have a better chance of sticking to time. Because if we start discussing, then I could take over the whole day, because people really have a lot to say about e-cigarettes. But remember, for the next hour, you know nothing, you think nothing. You have a blank slate of a mind about e-cigarettes. So, if you thought, as I hoped briefly, that e-cigarettes were a fad and I could go back to working on tobacco control and work on the combustion, the cigarettes that do the most harm, sorry, e-cigarettes are here to stay, for better or for worse. And how do we know that? Well, last year, Oxford Dictionary named vaping their word of the year. This is not a one-off. This is a trend that looks like it's here to stay for the foreseeable future, at least. So what am I talking about when I say e-cigarettes? Well, this is what first appeared on the market and are what are now considered first-generation devices, often called CIgHealth. So from the term, it's obvious they most resemble cigarettes. Some of them resemble an actual tobacco cigarette very closely. The earliest models were quite heavy. They were metallic. They tasted like metal. And even those progressed so that some of them now are much lighter, and they even have a papery feel like a cigarette itself. But they don't all look like cigarettes per se. As you can see, the models on the right, these are first generation, but designed to appeal to youth. They kind of look like colored pens. The second generation devices are commonly referred to as tanks. So these are refillable devices that are basically metal cylinders. This was a key development in terms of where e-cigarettes might go as effective cessation devices, largely because of the innovation in the batteries. The batteries with tanks are much more powerful. They hold a charge longer and they hold a more consistent charge. And why this is important is because these devices can deliver nicotine much more consistently and much more effectively than earlier generation devices. They also produce more vapor, and they produce a hotter vapor that more closely resembles the throat hit that smokers get from an actual cigarette. And those of you in addiction know how important that throat hit is to perpetuating the addiction. And these are the newest devices called mods. So like tanks, they are fillable, refillable, and rechargeable with a liquid, but they're much more customizable. So the user chooses their own atomizer and their own tank and their own mouthpiece, and they really adjust the power that's coming out of these devices, which really affects the type of smoke, the density of the vapor, I should say, how much vapor is produced. It also affects greatly the nicotine hit, of course. These are for hardcore e-cigarette users. So what do we know about who's using what type of a device and with what type of liquid? So this was a survey, an online survey of about 1,400 respondents from 33 countries done 2011-2012, which is really ancient history in the e-cigarette business. However, the results have been replicated in a much more recent 2015 adult survey in the UK. So what we know from this is that, now, no, this is usage by regular users. These aren't experimenters. These are people that have used e-cigarettes on average for 10 months. So the tank style is the preferred option for regular users. You can see almost 3/4 are using the second generation tank style. What this slide also shows is what adult users are choosing in terms of flavors. This will come up again later on in my presentation. So tobacco flavors are still the #1 choice, according to this survey, 53%. The ASH UK survey of about 12,000 adults in 2015 also showed that tobacco was the #1 flavor, but chosen by less than half, so about 40% of adults. And both surveys showed that fruit flavors are a close second, and then followed by mint and menthol, and then a whole host of other flavors. So when you're thinking about the downsides of e-cigarettes, perhaps uptake by youth, you're concerned about that. It's not as simple as, well, let's just ban the fruit and candy flavors, because the fruit flavors are really important to adults, many of whom are using these devices to reduce how many cigarettes they smoke or to try and quit altogether. So this is also from the UK survey of 12,000 adults, and this is showing what devices are preferred. So most experimenters start with the CIgHealth, the rechargeable type with a cartridge. And then you can see that those smokers and ex-smokers who continue to use e-cigarettes, who are current users, the tank style is by far the preferred choice of between 2/3 and 3/4 of current and ex-smokers. So what's the problem with these devices? Why is there such a controversy within tobacco control about these devices? So much so that I've actually witnessed shouting matches amongst people who used to be friendly colleagues on the same side of the tobacco control fight, who almost have come to fisticuffs over e-cigarettes. Well, on the one hand, you have those who believe that e-cigarettes are an unproven cessation device. They shouldn't be allowed to make any kind of claim for safety and efficacy until they've gone through the same rigorous testing as other forms of NRT. Why wouldn't we want that? The gold standard in science, we've required it for other forms of medicinal support for cessation. Why shouldn't it be required for e-cigarettes? There's a concern that e-cigarettes pose health risks to the users and possibly to bystanders. And there's also a concern that e-cigarettes have the potential to undermine significant gains that we've made in tobacco control, particularly over the last 20 years. On the other hand, there are those who believe with a fervor that approaches religious conviction that e-cigarettes are dramatically safer than combustion cigarettes that contain tobacco for two reasons. There's no tobacco, and nothing is being burned. The vast majority of the toxins from smoking are produced when the tobacco is burned, and those are the chemicals that are inhaled. So there's no combustion here. So there's no way that e-cigarettes could come close to the harms imposed by cigarette smoking, even if they're not absolutely safe. That for the first time, we have a device that is pretty close to a clean drug delivery device that can give smokers the nicotine they need, they're addicted to, without all of the other garbage that's making them sick. So those are the two sides of the debate. I hope that by the end of this presentation, all of you in this room are a little closer to the center. True Confessions, my organization from the outset has been of the view that e-cigarettes have great potential to help smokers quit, but also pose significant risks to tobacco control. And so we have been arguing from the get-go for a legislative framework that maximizes their potential while minimizing the risks. And I'll get to those measures down the road. So, of course, if this issue weren't complicated enough, along comes big tobacco to really muddy the waters. So many of you think, well, big tobacco's involved, so there has to be a sinister plot behind this. But big tobacco didn't start the e-cigarette craze. Most of the tank models, in fact, the vast majority of the tank models are produced by small companies that have nothing to do with big tobacco. And the CIgHealths initially were produced by these small entrepreneurial companies. But as you can see from this list, big tobacco saw the writing on the wall. I would say starting in 2012 is when the momentum really got going. And they started buying up e-cigarette companies that were doing well and or developing their own e-cigarette type products. Now, I should clarify, when I say e-cigarettes, I mean the whole gamut of products, not just CIgHealths, but the tanks and the mods. I'm using that term generically. But terminology is important in this game, as you'll see down the road when we look at surveys of usage. There is widespread belief in the tobacco control community that we're not capturing fully the extent of use, particularly amongst youth, because youth don't tend to call these devices e-cigarettes or even think of them as e-cigarettes. They call them e-pens or vape pens or e-hookahs and all kinds of other names, and they may not check off the box, yes, I'm using these devices, if the only term that's used in the surveys is e-cigarette. And again, if the waters weren't muddied enough, along comes British American Tobacco in the UK that has produced the first e-cigarette type device that is licensed as a pharmaceutical product under the MHRA, Medicines, Healthcare, and something or other regulatory authority. So this product is not yet on the market. It is going through commercial scale up as we speak, but it has been approved by the MHRA, which means that cessation counselors, practitioners with the National Health Service will be able to prescribe these products to people who are trying to quit smoking. This product is produced by a tobacco company. As one journalist has put it quite eloquently, but really the biggest issue I have with this is the double-edged benefits BAT will get out of addicting people to smoking and then selling a product that helps them quit. This is like a candy company offering dentistry or an oil drilling outfit getting paid to clean up its own oil spill. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, as I said, every single statement I'm going to make, there's a flip side. The flip side is that who other than big tobacco has the resources to develop a product that can go through the rigorous and costly process of getting approved as a drug, who can produce a product that is manufactured to extreme consistencies, et cetera, and I'll go through these details more down the road. So on the one hand, yes, my hackles go up that it's a tobacco company involved. On the other hand, Big Pharma didn't step up to the plate on this one. And the small companies don't have the resources to produce a product to the standards that big tobacco can. One other thing I want to say about this product is, although we call it an e-cigarette, it does not produce any vapor, and there is no battery, so it actually operates much more like a nicotine inhaler, which calls into question how successful it's going to be as a smoking cessation aid if it's the throat hit from the vapor and the power of the battery that are keys to making these devices successful quit smoking aids. So, are these devices legal or not? Those of you who were at Michael's presentation last night got a sneak peek of what I'm about to say. So in 2009, Health Canada released two statements. One was an advisory to the public and a notice to stakeholders and producers, which said that all electronic products for the administration of inhaled doses of nicotine are new drugs under the Food and Drugs Act, which means they require market authorization from Health Canada as a new drug before they can be sold. So it sounds really straightforward, but is it? Notice there's nothing in there that says e-cigarettes with nicotine are illegal. They didn't come out with any clear statement along those lines until last fall. So what this wishy-washy wording actually boils down to is that e-cigarettes for nicotine use are illegal. E-cigarette cartridges and liquid that contain nicotine are illegal. E-cigarettes that aren't for nicotine use but that make a health claim are illegal. However, e-cigarettes that are not for nicotine use and that don't make a health claim are legal. And that is the huge loophole through which the market has been blown open in the last 5 or 6 years. So initially we had products on the market in convenience stores and others that didn't contain nicotine, that supposedly didn't make health claims, although compliance was not always what we would like it to be. In fact, this is what we saw in the early days. So initially, these products were being sold in non-traditional venues like head shops, flea markets, sometimes mall kiosks. And then we started to see, as the waters were being tested and these places weren't being shut down, Health Canada would be sending out cease and desist letters, but that was it, that retailers got a little bolder, and we started to see e-cigarettes sold virtually everywhere: convenience stores, gas stations, supermarkets, pharmacies. Of course, the internet was one of the earliest venues and continues to be a significant source of sales and promotion. And then in more recent years, we've seen the rise of vape shops, so specialty shops where only e-cigarettes are sold, and for the most part, they sell second and third generation products with a whole variety of liquids. And then from the list on the right, you can see that e-cigarette distributors, producers, retailers are using all of the types of marketing that used to be the purview of big tobacco. Now, they're not all using them in Canada, they're not using all of these forms in Canada. Most of the promotion we're seeing is at point of sale in terms of signage, sometimes outdoor billboards, and countertop displays are particularly prominent. But we also have exposure to some types of advertising like this from Toronto Subway, and then a Sports Illustrated magazine that, although it originated in the States, this was the Canadian edition. And you can see there's nothing in that ad on the right that suggests quitting smoking is good for your health. This is a highly sexualized ad that's talking about a lifestyle device, just the way we saw with cigarettes in days of old. So the retail landscape for these products has changed quite a bit over the last 5 or 6 years. So we still have countertop displays in gas stations and the like, mostly, almost exclusively, of the CIgHealth models. But as I mentioned, vape shops have been springing up everywhere. I remember talking 3 years ago about a vape shop that was within a block of Parliament Hill, selling openly e-cigarettes and e-liquid with nicotine of varying strengths, and nothing was being done. Well, it was obvious to the owners as well, and that has now become a chain, East Team, that has about 8 shops in Ottawa alone, and is in various other cities across the province. And there are many more vape shops that do the same type of sales. So we have research from the US that has looked at the e-cigarette market. The market in 2015 is estimated to be worth $3.5 billion. The market has increased astronomically over 5 years, from a few hundred million to $3.5 billion in sales in the US alone. And interestingly, tanks and mods now account for over half of that market. So about 1.5 billion, or just over 40% of that total market, is estimated to be the CIgHealths, which are widely available, and about 57% are the tanks and mods, which are available, as I mentioned, mostly in vape shops as well as online. And an example of some of the newer types of retail outlets where you can get these newer generations, and where e-liquid and cartridges with nicotine are openly sold. We've also got things springing up like hookah bars. This is a vapor bar in Dundas, Ontario, near Hamilton. So you can go into this vapor bar. It's really kind of like a vape shop, but with more of a lounge vibe. So you can go in. I don't know if it's very clear to you, but these are all devices in front here with a wide array of liquids on the back left. And you can go in, have a stool at the bar, or sit by the piano. There are some comfortable chairs off screen, and you can sample different devices and different liquids. So who's using these devices? The graphs I'm going to show you in the next few slides are all from the Canadian Tobacco, Alcohol and Drug Survey. This is a survey that replaced CTUM, so it's done biannually now, which is the data is from 2013. And again, every year the market is changing so rapidly in e-cigarettes that these are likely to be underestimates of use. So what do we see here? Not surprisingly, the highest rates of experimentation and use are amongst younger Canadians, so 20% of youth as well as 20% of young adults have experimented with, tried e-cigarettes. But current use, so any use in the past 30 days, is significantly lower. So 3% of youth and 4% of young adults are current users. Sorry, did I get ahead of myself? I did. Sorry. Let me back up one. Okay, here we go. So this is use amongst Canadians overall. You can see from this graph the vast majority of e-cigarette users, both those who have tried and those who are currently using, are smokers. Much, much lower rates of experimentation and use amongst never smokers. So never smokers, only 3% of never smokers have ever used e-cigarettes, and 0.3% of never smokers age 15 and older have used e-cigarettes in the past 30 days. What this graph also tells us is only about 1 in 4 of those who've experimented with e-cigarettes go on to become current users. So there's much higher rates of experimentation than uptake of e-cigarettes as a product that they want to continue using. And this is consistent, this finding is consistent through many different studies in the UK as well, where we have the most significant body of research, which is why you'll see me cite a lot of research studies from the UK, as well as in the US. Okay, so I've done that one, now I'm caught up. So use by age and sex. So experimentation, teen and young adults, you can see a lot more male teens and young adults have experimented with e-cigarettes, but in terms of current use, there is almost no difference. Both males and females, much lower rates of current use. And lastly, use by age and smoking status. So I think it's fair to say that all of us in this room are much more concerned about e-cigarette use by non-smokers than by smokers. Certainly we're concerned about the health risks to smokers, but we have a whole range of other concerns if it's youth, particularly non-smoking youth, who are using these devices. So again, you can see the vast majority of experimenters in any age group are current smokers with very little experimentation, in the order of 15% amongst non-smoking youth. So this is from CTADS, the Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey, also from 2013, found that 15% of youth had tried e-cigarettes, so again, just experimented. Interestingly, survey data from Quebec actually found a third of youth from grades 7 to 11 had experimented with e-cigarettes. So consistent findings sort of Canada-wide, but much higher rates of experimentation in Quebec. So before I get into the actual research findings, I want to issue a huge caution. And that is, while there have been a lot of studies that have come out over the last 5 years, with more and more coming out, it seems, almost daily now, most of the studies are of very low scientific quality. There have been only 3 randomized controlled trials considered, the gold standard in scientific research, and even those involve very small sample sizes or very, very short duration. Most studies as well involve first-generation devices, and it has been demonstrated that these devices are much less effective at delivering nicotine. So it's not surprising that if the studies are involving first-generation devices, that the studies would show that these devices don't help smokers quit smoking. And the lack of quality controls and manufacturing standards on these devices means that any conclusion from a particular study cannot be generalized across the board because the devices are all so different. So even a finding of one particular brand using one particular liquid, if that brand and that liquid is not manufactured to a consistent standard, then you can't assume that they will operate the same way every time and give you the same dose of nicotine, for example. So there are a lot of problems with the scientific research on e-cigarettes. So the biggest risk to health is that these products are new, and because of that, we can't have any definitive findings about their long-term safety. They just haven't been around long enough. People haven't been using them long enough to say that if you were to puff on an e-cigarette 150 times a day, which is roughly the equivalent of a pack-a-day smoker, for 10 or 15 years, that there would be no adverse impact on your health. The studies to date, of necessity, are short-term. We do know a couple of studies have found increased airway resistance, which sends off a red flag. But as an example of the limitations of the studies that I'm talking about, the study by Vardavas involved 30 subjects using one type of e-cigarette that was puffed for 10 minutes. So these are very small studies for the most part. There are a few studies that have shown that there are some tobacco-specific nitrosamines, aldehydes, and heavy metals in both the liquid and the vapor of some products. This is a couple of studies, very few products. But what we do know is the newer generation devices operate at much higher temperatures, and therefore it makes sense that they would produce higher levels of these organic compounds. However, the temperatures, for the most part, don't approach combustion, and therefore, even when TSNAs and other toxic chemicals or potentially toxic chemicals have been found, they've been found at much lower levels than are in tobacco smoke. The main ingredient of the liquid in e-cigarettes is propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, or a combination of the two. And although propylene glycol is in many types of medication, including asthma inhalers, it's the main ingredient in theater fog, it's in some food products. What we don't know is the safety of inhaling this deep into the lungs for months or years. So that's the biggest unknown. I mentioned before the big problem with the lack of quality controls and manufacturing standards, and to me that is a problem that's relatively easy to fix. If governments would simply apply their consumer product safety standards, their provisions under consumer product safety laws to these products and rigorously enforce. That's not being done. Very small quantities of a few toxic chemicals have been found in secondhand vapor, including nicotine in a few studies. And then there are risks from the ingestion of e-liquid, particularly with nicotine. That risk as well is very easy to reduce or eliminate by requiring child child-safe bottles, and not allowing such huge bottles that would have contain a potentially lethal dose of nicotine. So the next category of risk is what risks to tobacco control do these products pose? So there's a group of risks that we're going to look at, including renormalizing of smoking behaviors, a potential gateway to nicotine addiction through either vaping or cigarette smoking amongst youth, and what is the impact on e-cigarettes? Will they in fact undermine quitting rather than promoting quitting? So this is the kind of promotion that we're seeing for e-cigarettes. Again, very little of this in Canada, an awful lot of it in the US and the UK, where there are much fewer restrictions in the marketplace for e-cigarettes, and in the US, of course, much fewer restrictions on promotion of tobacco products themselves. So not only are the marketing vehicles used by e-cigarette companies replicating those of big tobacco, the sponsorships, the lifestyle advertising, but also the types of imagery. So you can see these are very much aspirational lifestyle ads where e-cigarettes are replacing the tobacco cigarette as the lifestyle accessory that you need if you want to be young and hip and sexy and glamorous and rugged and masculine and all of those traits that tobacco companies used to associate with cigarettes. So what will happen if wherever smoking is now banned, smoking is replaced by vaping? And we now see vaping all over the place in bars and cafes and restaurants. And you can see here the electronic, ECTA, electronic something or other, trade associations, Canadian, now posting lists of vape-friendly establishments, just like we did in the early days of bylaws where we had a list of restaurants that did not permit smoking. There is a vape-friendly lounge in Heathrow, and I'm sure other airports are developing them as well. So if this becomes the norm, will vaping become a normalized behavior the way smoking once was? And what will that do to youth perceptions of the social unacceptability of smoking per se? I don't think we know. So we're also concerned about the impact on youth of the widespread promotion and availability of a product that contains nicotine. I mentioned earlier that fruit flavors are the #2 choice amongst vapors. Well, there are thousands of flavors on the market available over the internet, and many of them are clearly aimed at youth. Bubblegum, cherry cola, cotton candy, and the like. The challenge in regulating this product will be to prohibit flavors that overtly target youth while allowing flavors that adult smokers find helpful in getting them off smoking to continue to be sold. We're also seeing a subculture springing up, a vaping subculture, particularly amongst youth, with clouding competitions spreading across the US. I haven't heard of any in Canada. That doesn't mean they're not there. And you can go on YouTube and find all kinds of videos of people doing, particularly young people, doing tricks with the vapor, just the way people once did with cigarette smoke, blowing rings and all kinds of other things. And as you can see, the image, the bottom left there, the amount of vapor that can be produced by these devices greatly exceeds the amount of smoke, hence from a cigarette, hence the clouding competitions. So what do we know about youth uptake and how much we should be worried about this? And what do we know about whether e-cigarettes are becoming a gateway to smoking tobacco cigarettes for youth, or to youth becoming addicted to e-cigarettes themselves? So we do have some data. So this is from the National Youth Tobacco Survey that's done annually in the US. It's a huge survey, and I'm sure you all have seen the headlines, particularly when the 2011 and 2012 findings came out. There was a great hue and cry that youth use of e-cigarettes had doubled in just 1 year, which is correct. 4.7 to 10%. But that's ever use. So that could be one try of an e-cigarette by high school students. Ever use by middle school students also doubled in the same 2-year period. However, current use, which just means any use in the past 30 days, is dramatically lower, as we saw with the CTADS data. However, in the past year, 2014 data, you can see a huge spike from 4.5% to 13.5% in 1 year alone in current use amongst high school students. Now, at the same time, smoking rates, cigarette smoking rates amongst U.S. high school students has gone down significantly. And we know in Canada, smoking rates amongst high school students and middle school students has also gone down. So there's no indication as yet that increasing rates of experimentation and use of e-cigarettes is translating into increasing smoking rates yet, but it's still fairly early days. So what do we know about whether people are starting with e-cigarettes, particularly youth, and then going on to become cigarette smokers? Well, we don't have a lot of data. This is from research by Hammond and Associates out of the University of Waterloo. So these are online surveys. They're not directly comparable. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the next slide. So 92% of current smokers, and this was an online survey of about 1,200 smokers age 16 and over. So about 92% of them tried a cigarette, of current smokers tried a cigarette first, but 5% tried an e-cigarette first. Now, that doesn't mean, you can't conclude that the e-cigarette use then led them to the cigarette smoking, because they could have been people who are most at risk of smoking to begin with. So there's still a gap in our knowledge, but that does raise a red flag. Sorry, did I get, there we go. So this is data from the UK, and what this survey shows, so this is amongst all youth age 11 to 18 who are aware of e-cigarettes and had then tried an e-cigarette. So this shows that 70% had tried a cigarette first, but fully 8% had tried an e-cigarette first. This is from a recent research done on 11 colleges, 2 different states. Small sample again, only 271 college student smokers at baseline. So this survey found that use of e-cigarettes for 2 or more quarters, so these were students that were followed for their 4 years of university, and so use of e-cigarettes for 2 or more quarters was a predictor, a significant predictor of current smoking at follow-up. So those who had used e-cigarettes for 2 or more quarters were much more likely to continue to smoke at the end of their college term than those who did not experiment with e-cigarettes. So that raises a significant red flag. The question then is, do e-cigarettes really promote cessation, or are they just promoting dual use? Well, that study that I just showed you suggests that dual use is a valid concern. And in fact, most studies, the vast majority of studies, will show that most e-cigarette users also smoke. In other words, most e-cigarette users are dual users. However, there is some indication, that this dual use could be a stepping stone towards quitting smoking altogether. And certainly a lot of colleagues in the UK fervently believe this to be so. One of the findings of the research seems to be that whether or not e-cigarette use is a stepping stone towards quitting amongst current smokers is their motivation in using e-cigarettes to begin with. So in the previous slide, the college students, the lowest response rate was they were using them to cut down or quit. The vast majority were using them because their friends did, because they wanted to try them, they were curious, it was something new and novel. The UK surveys, however, show that the vast majority of smokers who are using e-cigarettes are using them to cut down and quit. Research also shows that using NRT while also smoking is associated with higher quit rates, that ultimately those dual users at the outset have higher rates of quitting down the road. So the data isn't all what it seems at first blush. We shouldn't necessarily dismiss out of hand findings that most e-cigarette users are continuing to smoke. This could be, and most research is a snapshot of a current moment in time. It's much more, we need many more longitudinal studies to find out exactly what's happening over time with this dual use. So what do we know about how effective e-cigarettes are as a cessation aid? Well, we have research that shows that they can significantly reduce cravings even in the absence of nicotine. So one of the advantages that e-cigarettes offer over other forms of nicotine replacement therapy is they allow smokers to continue the behaviors to which they're addicted to, the hand-to-mouth action, and for the second and third generation devices, the throat hit that they expect before they get relief from the nicotine itself. But what about the ability of these devices to deliver nicotine? More and more research studies are showing that e-cigarettes can deliver nicotine effectively under certain circumstances. Experienced users have much more success in getting a significant dose of nicotine from the devices than people that are given a device right now with a little instruction and told to participate or then participating in a study. Research also shows consistently that second and third generations, the tanks and the mods, as I mentioned earlier, are much more effective at delivering nicotine than the earlier generation devices. And some studies show that e-cigarettes can deliver levels of nicotine comparable to what a smoker would get from a cigarette under the right combination of experienced user and effective device with a high enough level of nicotine in the liquid. So the graph here is just showing the green line is level of nicotine from a tobacco cigarette, with the red line a new generation device. And this latest study by St. Helen and colleagues that was published earlier this year showed even higher levels of nicotine were reached by participants in that study. So we do have actual studies that show that e-cigarettes are effective, can be effective in helping smokers quit smoking, including 3 randomized controlled trials. However, even those trials were small, very, very small sample sizes and short duration. The first 2 found that e-cigarettes were at least as effective as the patch. So the naysayer, the opponents to e-cigarettes, and this is why you need to take a critical eye to all studies and headlines in particular about e-cigarettes. So the naysayers would say, well, e-cigarettes are no more effective than the patch. Therefore, the conclusion being, we don't need them, let's get rid of them. The flip side of that coin is that e-cigarettes were found to be just as effective as the patch. And that doesn't mean we don't need them, because not everyone is served well by the patch. It doesn't work for all, in fact, for very few smokers. And the studies that found that e-cigarettes can be as effective as the patch were of first-generation devices. So there was a randomized controlled trial published in 2014, also a very small one, only 41 participants, but this study used a tank-style e-cigarette, and the findings were 19% quit rate after 8 months. So the numbers are really impressive with some of the studies. However, one of my pet peeves about any studies about cessation effectiveness is you have to dig down in the fine print to find out the definition of having quit. Is it they measure smokers on any given day Is it 6 months continuous abstinence? Is it 30 days continuous abstinence? It varies so dramatically from study to study that it's really hard to compare. And that's true whether we're talking NRT, bupropion, whatever. And it's also true of e-cigarettes. All kinds of surveys of users report high quit rates with e-cigarette use. Now, on the one hand, you can say, well, these are not very scientific. They're just surveys, and often it's self-select. People go to a website of a research institute or a company and choose to participate in the survey. On the other hand, you can argue, well, these are experienced e-cigarette users, and therefore it makes sense that they're much more likely to report higher quit rates than inexperienced users who've gone to the grocery store or the gas station and bought a first-generation device that probably doesn't even contain nicotine. And of course, we have all kinds of testimonials. I'm sure most of you in this room have spoken to a smoker who claims that they have quit smoking or at least significantly cut down by using an e-cigarette. And although that's not scientifically sound, I think we need to at least keep an open mind when people say nothing else worked for me and an e-cigarette finally got me off of smoking. So back to some data from the UK. They have been tracking e-cigarette use very rigorously since 2009, and you can see from this graph that overall, a third of quit attempts in the UK involve e-cigarettes. They are, in fact, the most popular method of trying to quit smoking in the UK now. You can also see from this that use of all nicotine products has decreased. And not on this graph, but also studied has been the fact that there's been an increase in both the number of quit attempts and a slight increase in quit successes over this time period. Some of you may have heard, or many of you may have heard on the news May, June, I think, when this report was released. Public Health England produced a major update summary of the literature with recommendations, and this is what they are recommending to their cessation counselors regarding what to say to people who want to quit smoking and who are asking for advice regarding e-cigarettes. They're saying that smokers who have tried other methods of quitting without success could be encouraged to try e-cigarettes to stop smoking. That stop smoking services should support smokers using e-cigarettes to quit by offering them behavioral support to go along with their use of e-cigarettes. And that encouraging smokers who can't or don't want to stop smoking to switch to e-cigarettes could help reduce smoking-related disease, death, and health inequalities substantially. This is the report, and this is probably what you would remember from it, if anything, is that this report claimed that e-cigarettes are 95% safer than tobacco cigarettes. And again, because there's no tobacco, there's no combustion, and that 95% is based on modeling that was done by a number of researchers from around the globe. So what's been happening in terms of legislative developments? Well, we've seen a number of jurisdictions get on the bandwagon in the absence of action by the provincial or federal government. So we've got school boards and universities and airlines and some airports, and if you know of others, please let me know to help me update my list. And then we saw, as we did with smoke-free workplaces and public places, municipalities started to take some leadership role on the e-cigarette issue, but for the most part, this was outdoors, either municipal property indoors and out or outdoors. Not that many people vaping outdoors on municipal property. So it was a token gesture, but it was a signal that municipalities were concerned about e-cigarettes and wanted higher levels of government to do something. And I'm happy to report that we've seen a whole whole set of dominoes falling over the last year in Canada. A lot of action by provincial governments, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, PEI, and of course Ontario. Now I have in effect 1st of January 2017, because there are various provisions. January 1st, 2016, no e-cigarette sales to minors, and e-cigarette use in public places and workplaces where smoking is banned will also be banned. The January 1st, 2017 question mark is related to the display ban provisions, which haven't been determined and will be determined by regulation. Finally, enough critical mass political pressure brought to bear on the federal government, and so the federal government referred the matter to the Standing Committee on Health, which held hearings this time last year and issued a report. I forget when the report was issued. Early spring. The government response was due in July, early July, which was before the election call, but the government just did not answer, which they are required to under parliamentary procedure, but they chose not to, not surprisingly. So we have no answer from this federal government on e-cigarettes, and there are a number of issues which can only be dealt with by the federal government. For example, determining whether or not the sale of e-cigarettes with nicotine is actually legal, or whether it's going to continue openly but illegally in this country, as well as regulating manufacturing standards and child safety standards. Oh, I'm doing well for time. And you can see a number of U.S. states have also legislated e-cigarette controls. The recommendations from the Health Committee were wide-ranging. They support the sale of e-cigarettes with nicotine, with controls, of course. They want a completely new legislative framework, and if that can't be done quickly and easily, then they support the regulation of e-cigarettes under the Tobacco Act. They want product standards. They recommended labeling and labeling standards as well as limiting health claims. A ban on use in federal workplaces, which of course is the only thing the federal government can have jurisdiction over in terms of where these products can be used. They also recommended a ban on cross-branding, which is something I feel strongly about. The image I showed you of the list of tobacco companies that are now in the e-cigarette game, I don't know if anyone noticed the pack at the bottom. Anyone notice it? Who is paying attention? Come on. Okay, Simon, what was it? Come on. It did. Okay, anyone fill in the blanks? M? No? Oh, come on, no one was paying attention? Okay, Mark 10, does that ring a bell with anybody? Okay, why does it ring a bell? Yeah, so Mark 10 is a long-standing cigarette brand, and it is the first time that an e-cigarette has been cross-branded with a tobacco brand. We don't want to see that. If these devices have potential as cessation aids, okay. We don't want to give these devices any way of promoting smoking, so let's ban cross-branding before it becomes a problem. Of course, they want to see a lot more research done and some research at the federal level, and they support a ban on flavors that target youth. I don't have time to get into the difference in regulations in the European Union, but if anyone has a question on that, I'll be happy to answer it. And finally, I want to conclude with whether or not e-cigarettes are our friend or our foe. I think the evidence shows that e-cigarettes can be a friend to smokers who want to cut down and or quit smoking. They're much safer than smoking, albeit we don't know for sure yet whether they are 100% safe, but they're dramatically safer than smoking. Not sure I buy into the 95%, but the research is pretty consistent that there's no way the harms from e-cigarette use could approach those known harms from smoking. They're more satisfying than nicotine replacement therapy. They deliver more nicotine more quickly, and they also satisfy smokers' addictions to the behaviors. We also know that from newer generation devices that nicotine can be delivered effectively, and a high enough dose of nicotine can be delivered to satisfy nicotine cravings. However, these devices can be a foe to smokers if, in fact, they serve to perpetuate dual use. In other words, continued smoking and vaping for when you can't smoke, such as perhaps in your workplace or on public transit, that type of thing, rather than moving smokers towards quitting. And how we regulate this is sort of the big $64,000 question. How do we make these devices available to smokers who want them to quit or cut down, but don't have them available or have them as an encouragement to smokers to just keep on smoking? I do believe these products are of some risk to non-smokers. They are a foe to non-smokers. We don't want any non-smoker using an e-cigarette. We don't want them inhaling whatever chemical substances are in them. There's absolutely no reason to do so. And we certainly don't want non-smokers becoming addicted to the nicotine in e-cigarettes, whether or not they end up going on to cigarette smoking. Why have a new generation of young people addicted to a new form of nicotine? It doesn't serve any positive public health purpose. And I really believe where this debate ultimately comes down, what it ultimately comes down to, will depend on the regulatory measures that are put in place. And I'm really pleased to see so many provinces acting, doing the stuff that is the obvious stuff in my books. So not allowing sales to youth, getting rid of displays so they aren't openly being promoted, people aren't openly being enticed to try me. But allowing these products to be available to smokers for whom they do have significant potential. Thanks very much. Questions? William?
I'm just curious about the cost involved in the various CIgHealths and tanks and mods, which are compared to cigarettes. I mean, would it be much cheaper to switch?
So the answer is it depends, like everything else in this world of e-cigarettes. So yes, they are much cheaper compared to a pack of cigarettes over time. The initial outlay, particularly of the newer generation devices, the tank style, is much higher. So it's about $100 for a kit with the tank or charger and the liquid. Initial outlay would be about $100. But then the per pack cost is significantly lower, half or less than a pack of cigarettes, according to various e-cigarette company websites. The CIgHealth ones are $10 and less for the equivalent of 1 to 2 packs.
And where does the nicotine come from? Is it a tobacco product?
Comes from the same place as the nicotine in pharmaceutical products. It's manufactured from tobacco products in China, most of it in China.
Thank you. Excellent presentation, by the way.
Thank you. Wow. I thought there would be a stampede. You guys are hungry.
I have a question, Melody.
Okay,
actually.
Dan.
I've been waiting to read something about a kid taking a shot of e-juice on a dare. I mean, you mentioned the poisoning from e-juice. Is that very common? Like, how poisonous is it? Is it like, I mean, are we seeing that very often, or?
So we're seeing, a lot of a big increase in calls to poison control centers, but nowhere near the number of calls that they get from kids chewing cigarette butts and that type of thing. In terms of deaths from consumption or deaths or significant harm, I think I've heard of 3 in the media globally, and that's in about 8 or 9 years that e-cigarettes have been, getting a lot of attention. We used to say, I forget the exact numbers, but X number of milliliters of nicotine would kill a child, and that was based on one study which has since been found to be very faulty. So the belief now is much more nicotine is required to kill than what that initial formula was, and there are very few, if any, bottles on the market that contain certainly not a lethal dose for adults. But in any case, it should not be drunk. So child safety caps are absolutely needed to prevent that. And it's such a simple little measure that should have been done from the get-go.
Especially with the cartoon labeling that you saw on your slide
Exactly.
there, right?
Absolutely. And the delicious flavors. I mean, there's every flavor imaginable, and there are even websites with recipes. So you combine 3 flavors and you get the equivalent of, a B52 liqueur with the 3 liqueurs and the layers in your e-cigarette.
Thanks. This is more of a comment than a question. And I think you've done a tremendous job in looking at the literature. I did want to mention that Melody's involved in a study that we're doing together that's looking systematically at the literature and also looking at some and doing some studies here in Ontario longitudinally as well. The results are not completely out, but we do have the results from the review of the literature on cessation aid effectiveness. And the conclusion is very clear, is that the evidence is inconclusive. So you haven't said anything different than that, but I just wanted to note that you've picked out certain studies, and it's fine, I'm not criticizing, but just so that people know that a systematic review with quality appraisal of the science in the studies has been done, and the results will be out to you shortly on those.
Thanks, Rob. I neglected to mention the ReSig study. Shame on me, especially since I'm part of it. Slap on the wrist when I get off the podium.
What's your greatest fear if legislation lags on and on?
Well, my greatest fear before we started to see the provinces acting was that vaping would become this new lifestyle behavior, and we would start seeing it everywhere the way we used to see smoking. We heard, in the early days, some tobacco enforcement officers telling us that kids were using e-cigarettes in schools, and they were telling the teachers and the principals and the enforcement officer, well, you can't do anything about it, it doesn't contain tobacco. And we were seeing e-cigarettes being used in restaurants, and restaurants were calling, asking for advice. What do I do about these products? Can I ban them? Customers are wondering, is it smoking? What's going on? I just, as a public health advocate, I just don't want to see another form of addiction and have our successors in a room like this 20 years from now shaking their heads saying, why didn't we see it coming? We now have, 60, 80,000 people addicted to nicotine through e-cigarettes. Now, yes, we won't have the death toll, in all likelihood, that we have from tobacco use, but do we want a new form of socialized addiction? No. And without the data, we didn't really have any understanding or any way to know whether normalization of vaping would then translate into higher rates of smoking. My fears on that front have been largely allayed, not completely because of that situation with big tobacco getting involved. And we know their motivation is never altruistic. So I can't say I'm totally relaxed that won't ultimately happen, but the data so far doesn't suggest that e-cigarette use is causing an uptick in smoking rates amongst youth or adults.
Yeah, Michael Perley again. A couple of things. One issue we need to keep an eye on, too, is the use of THC liquid.
Yes.
A lot of these devices are being used to avoid the same problems with smoking marijuana that people are using them to avoid vis-a-vis smoking cigarettes. So that's going to be an ongoing issue, I think. And I just comment on the ferocity of the debate. It's sort of it's unusual in tobacco control within the community of scientists and everyone involved to have these knockdown, drag 'em out fights, and I think it testifies to the frustration that many people have experienced over many years trying to reduce what to them from within the scientific and research communities appears to be a no-brainer, to try and reduce the impact of this so-called no-brainer on the population and have so, relatively speaking, so little success over many, many years. I think that's led to a level of frustration that when a possible, an alternative to smoking with a possible downside in terms of perpetuation, as you've really described very well, comes up, I think that has something to do with the ferocity of the debate. But I just second what you said. It's amazing, the fights that I've seen. I haven't seen anyone in our community fight with anyone else in our community a tenth as much about anything else in tobacco control as I've seen about e-cigarettes. It's astonishing.
And if you get the vapors involved.
Oh, gosh, yeah, right.
Yeah, they fight
It's
dirty.
evangelical. Yeah.
Well, they fight dirty. And these are people who have successfully quit smoking by virtue of using a tank style or a mod. And I have been at tobacco control conferences, particularly in the UK, where they have been invited to participate and to speak. And they have gone on Twitter and various other social media and literally lied about statements I made. And they name people, and they're vicious in their attacks. And anyone that doesn't go 100% behind these devices, anyone who raises any concerns, are absolutely shamed publicly by the vaping community.
Just one other thing. You mentioned the restrictions coming in Ontario, and for folks in the room who are going to have something to do with implementing those restrictions, and there are a number of you, the signage. Keep a very close eye on the signage issue. We have seen a suggested graphic for no vaping, which is not entirely distinguishable from no smoking. And I don't know what the reaction to that's going to be. Are there going to be two separate signs, one for no smoking and one for no vaping? Or are there going to be one a single sign with both non-behaviors illustrated, and what's that going to cost to put that in place, and what's going to be the confusion between existing signage and new signage? So we could have a real zoo on our hands. So just be prepared for that. That's all. I'm not sure that this is going to go very smoothly, but unfortunately, it is what it is.
I think we're good. No more